gentlemen, boys and girls, classic and hard mode gamers all over the internet for Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. We're on YouTube right now. We're making content for YouTube. So yeah, all you guys on YouTube, welcome to another edition of Bad Gamer Bias Review. Those of you guys that aren't familiar with the cutscenes going on there, this one's for Final Fantasy IX. Again, we are covering every game that we've played with our community on Twitch. If you'd like to find our Twitch, you can scroll down and find the link for that. Because of the YouTube copyright stuff, we aren't allowed to play the actual sounds from the game itself because they are all heavily copyrighted by Sony, or whoever else owns the rights to the music for this. I believe it's Sony. So what you're hearing in the background is Monster Cat music. Thanks to Monster Cat for being fucking awesome, and us being a card-carrying member of the Monster Cat community, we get to actually play that music in the background. So, another Bad Gamer Bias review. This one is for a game that I think also is pretty heavily contested in terms of where it fits in the Final Fantasy universe, and I'm going to explain why. So let's set everything up for you guys to explain exactly what we're going to go over. There's 3 bullet marks that we like to cover for each one of our games. The overall ranking from myself personally, and again, not a professional, not a game designer, not some speedrunner, not an expert in the slightest. I'm just like most of you guys that will watch this video. Just your average, loves these games kind of gamer. And do think that some of these games were some of the best ever made, and I don't want them just to drift away with time. So, those bullet marks that we have are how does it play, the systems and in the game and how they affect the actual gameplay, and then the story. Does it captivate? Does it pull you in? Does it make you care about the people and the situations that they're in? There's going to be an overall score at the very end from yours truly on what I think personally on my side the game score is out of 10. And also, we did play this through. If there are mods available for a game and we are aware of them, we're going to share them with you guys. So if you'd like to have the game and try them modded, I can send you a link in the description to exactly where you can go to find those and play them for yourselves. So let's jump right back into it. The Return to Fantasy for Final Fantasy IX. How does it play? Good. So, my biggest problem with when I ask how does it play is for those of us that were playing these games brand new. I was one of those people that one of the first Final Fantasies I played was 6, right into 7. So, massive gap, right? Then 8 right after that. Then when 9 came out, I remember the TV commercials and seeing all the posts up at Walmart for the new game, the airships and everything that was there. And my older friends were like, oh, they're going back to their roots with like the fantasy root stuff that's there. So how does it play is it plays like a newer game set in an older Final Fantasy universe. Obviously, everything was kind of new age. Square was definitely playing around with some systems to bring back, but change from older styles of Final Fantasy. And in that respect, they did a fantastic job. I think that everything gameplay-wise was very smooth. I don't remember an insane amount of bugs for the game at all. I think it was really polished when it released, and again, even though the animation was different, the cutscenes and everything that were happening were very well spaced out and timed for you to enjoy and embrace the situation that you were in. So in terms of how it plays, even to include the side content, everything was very streamlined, very sharp. And I don't remember this guy are sick, any, talking lines that didn't make any sense. I don't remember any. There may have been. But overall, front to back, I think the game played fantastically. The systems in the game and the effects that it had on gameplay. We might be here a second. Those systems that we have in the game. The ATB. You could literally do homework while you were playing 9. Because it was so insanely slow. This is something that we even felt when we played this on stream recently, and we grabbed a mod to help it not be like that. This ATB system made it kind of felt like a chess game, kind of, with Final Fantasy extras attached to it. Let's put it that way. It was so insanely long. That's a minor hit from me, just because it was coming from, like I said, Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy VII, where it felt like things were more fast-paced because visually you're playing with the more realistic or the polygon stuff that was there that was supposed to be realistic. But from that steampunk to the realism to the fantasy stuff, this one made you slow down quite a lot. The system brought back from older Final Fantasies where you have to actually learn things from the weapons and the items. The summons had to be learned. You had to spend time with each one of those items to actually learn the spell or the skill. That system for me, again, just coming from, in my youth, somebody who played 7 into 8. That kind of felt slow as well. Now, my comparison for that is the same people that would complain about the draw system in Final Fantasy VIII, because it was a newer system. I didn't hear as much complaining about how you had to just stick with the weapon that maybe wasn't a preferred or awesome weapon just to get the skills off of it before you got rid of it. This is one of those things that I think has a lot to do with pacing. Just as the draw system did, this was making you stay at a certain power level so then you could increase, and then the jump was bigger after you had completed it, but it all took time. So it kind of slowed the progression down in its own way and made you care about each and every possible addition to your toolkit and focus on that, which, if I'm not mistaken, like the job system, earlier Final Fantasies, this was no new news to anybody who had played those games in the past and were very used to this learned system. So for all of them, this was probably like, okay, sick. It's back to basics, back to roots, and probably felt good. For me, didn't feel good. Didn't feel good at all. Upgrade system wasn't like upgrade into weapon, upgrade with the newest thing that you got. I can use this shiny toy. It was, I got the shiny toy, and I can't use it until I get these last couple of levels on this other rapier or this staff, because I really, really need that skill. So that kind of felt like a drawback to me personally. Again, biased review, damned if I am, damned if I'm right, and damned if I'm not, but that's just how I felt about it. That kind of held the same for the summons. You literally had to have it equipped, had to have everything learned. It was like you get shiny toys and you can't use them. So for me, first time playthrough, and then even with our second time through as a grown adult in my 30s, I kind of just kept looking at the system and I'm like, man, this really just stalled out power. A lot. Like a lot. Also, when it comes to the extra side quests that were there, Chocobo Hot Cold was fantastic. I will admit that. It was frustrating. I will not argue. It was very frustrating. The treasure hunt was fun. Just actually enjoying the world. Just stuff that was incorporated with the world. Extra bosses like Ozma. Throughout the travels, running into other mobs, other NPCs, other things that would unlock different parts of that. The trivia stuff in game. Those were all really fucking neat. Very, very frustrating at the time while playing it. But overall, looking back at those, that content didn't get boring because it was challenging, but it made you explore the world that they created. Think that was smart. Think it was a good addition, and I really enjoyed them. Not going to beat the systems up too much because, again, for people that were classically infatuated with the way Final Fantasy was, this one really nailed that, I think. And I think for a lot of people, this was something that they missed, and getting into the realism and the steampunk versions of the two prior titles for Final Fantasy in 7 and 8, this was probably a really cold drink of refreshing water to go back to the actual fantasy aspect of the game. All right, how does the story captivate and draw you in? This is a tough one for me because I affiliated myself more with Squall and Cloud, and still to this day I appreciate those two characters, even for their angsty, I don't care, somewhat emotional and emo attitude that they have. I still felt like that I'm going to be the leader. I'm going to be, the person who pulls us through and perseveres. And they grow into those leadership roles throughout the entirety of the game. 9 made you care about each person's individual story so much that you had to just care for everybody. Or you were picking your favorites and then got really either bored or upset that you were having to focus on somebody else. Steiner, fantastic fucking story. Vivi, awesome story. But all of them to be wrapped together into what the centralized storyline was, I feel like their individual stories kind of got fragmented from what like the overall encompassing threat, problem, story was. But it doesn't take away from the fact that you did care. Everyone loves Vivi. I think Zidane's overall story wrapped up okay in the end, and he eventually became that I'm gonna be the leader and do X, Y, and Z. But I feel like the story captivated in a different way than previous versions of Final Fantasy, because it was each one of these guys has their own individual thing that is tearing at them, and we are helping them evolve through their own personal strife. So Not that it's any less than 7 or 8 in terms of story, because I think the story was fantastic. But I do feel like it did feel disjointed throughout the playthrough if you had no prior knowledge of the game whatsoever. Wrapping things up the way that it did with the story, I know a lot of people with the main character and then the main, I was almost the bad guy, now I'm not a bad guy. The way that they set that up with Zidane and with the ends up not being such a huge bad guy was awesome. I do like that all of a sudden there was this big cosmic relevance, which with Final Fantasies up to this point, with 7, 8, and 9, there was some overwhelming above the earthly plane existence that was there. I do think that some of the story and the context for like what they were was a little confusing, but that same cycle of death theory and that same things must end for there to be life, must be like an end to rebirth, and what they were specifically there to do. I do think that when that came to pass and everybody felt Zidane's actual strife, that it either A, made them love the story even more, or B, go, man, this is very extra. Because they didn't focus on very many of the intricacies for him as a character throughout almost the entirety. It was just the loose cannon, the conversations between characters in the game just kind of made him the carefree thief that he was, and then all of a sudden it opens up and he's the character that has this big cosmic relevance. Still kind of get hung up on that personally myself. Just a little bit. Doesn't take away anything for how the story was delivered and how much we actually cared about people within the story, but that ends up being like the main storyline, which I think kind of takes away from some of the other people's overall stories. So captivating, yes. Confusing for me a little bit. Overall, I will say this before we go right to the score for Final Fantasy IX. As a kid, I had just gotten done playing 7, 8, and was so waiting for 9 to be the same thing. It wasn't. 9 wasn't the same thing for me. Even on stream playing through 7 and 8 and then going to 9, it really feels like you have to completely change your headset and appreciate 9 for what it is. The other systems in the game, I do think that the card game in 9 was such a huge letdown from Triple Triad. Just my personal opinion on that. Very RNG, not specified or specific. But I did care about the characters, and I did care about the story. And I think that's kind of an important part of Final Fantasy, is that you can be drawn into the world. And I do think that you can. I just don't feel myself that the overwhelming direction and the overall big bad guy that doesn't end up being the big bad guy was exactly what I thought it was going to be, which can be a good or a bad thing. But I'll quit trying to defend myself and how I feel about the game. My overall grade for Final Fantasy IX is going to be a 6 out of 10. A lot of that has to do with just how I absorbed Final Fantasies and being a person that played 7 and 8 religiously, multiple times to beat, to try to get perfect. After doing Final Fantasy IX one time, outside of playing it on a hard mode, I didn't feel a need to go back and do it again. I didn't feel like any of the side quests, like if I'd missed it, that it was worth going back in and trying again. And I think a lot of that perception, again, because everyone rates Final Fantasies based on the first one and what the first one they played did. 9 was the fourth one that I played. And after some of the futuristic stuff that we dealt with in the other 6 to 8, this one just didn't feel as personal to me. Not to take anything away from the fact that the game was fantastic, but for me personally, and since this is my biased reaction and biased review of it, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Better than average, but not much better than that. Throughout our playthrough for Final Fantasy IX, we were privileged enough to get to use the Magori mod. The link for Magori is going to be in the description if you guys are interested in seeing a crazy version of this game that really brings it to life. Alternate Fantasy is another very, very popular hard mode for the game. We have played that. It is very, very, very good. And again, those links will be in the description. But overall, like I said, I have a feeling that a lot of friends of ours and supporters of the channel are going to be like, well, just because you didn't, feel the same thing that you did for 7 and 8. That's not a fair shake. 9 was its own game, and 9 was its own... I get it, right? And the way you feel about it probably has a lot to do with when you played it. It might have been your first Final Fantasy. I understand. Bad gamer, normal dude, bias review, bias reaction. Not one of my favorites. And not by quite a bit, actually. But can't take away from the fact that the game was fun, and that I think that it was well done. Just not one to write home to mom about, for me personally. That does it for another Bad Gamer Bias reaction from yours truly, DJ Soundstorm. Look forward to seeing the rest of these premiered, because we are far from done. One of these are going to go out every single month for games that we played, and we have a lot left to do. Games like Final Fantasy X, Legend of Dragoon, Fallout 4, there's a bunch. Some of the Dark Souls are in there too. So we're really excited to keep this series going. Please do us a huge favor. Hit that thumbs up button, or hit thumbs down, because fuck me, maybe you like the game and you think I'm an idiot. That's completely up to you. Biased reviews get biased reactions, right? Either way, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave us some feedback, and do check out the mods that we brought up. Thank you guys so much for being here for this one, and we will catch you on the next one. Y'all have a good one.